It's a beautiful Thursday across the Lone Star State, and what better way to celebrate Thursday than with our weekly segment, Math Tuesday.
Math Tuesday! Math Tuesday.
It's Math Tuesday here on Texas Football Today, when we dive in the numbers of Texas high school football and bring you some fun facts. And I think today is going to be full of fun facts because what we're going to do is take a look at teams that were really good in close games. When you take a look at Texas high school football writ large, you will obviously have your fair share of blowouts, teams that go off and win a game by 45 points. But where you really want to make your hay is when the game is decided by one score. Now, we can certainly have a conversation as to whether or not that is luck, whether or not that is skill. We know that there are things that are relatively random in football. For example, fumble recovery rate is essentially random. The number of forcing a fumble is a skill. Holding on to the football and not fumbling is a skill. But once the ball is out, studies have shown that there is no discernible real skill behind recovering a football. That is essentially a random exercise that the offense and the defense across the spectrum of football have about a 50-50 shot of recovering that ball. But close games, certainly I would say that the jury is out, and we don't necessarily know what it is. So here's how I define a close game, is a one-score game, okay? A game decided by 8 points or fewer. And so what I did was I looked at I got the data, and I looked at every UIL Texas high school football game in 2024. Every single one of them. And there are a lot of them. In fact, I have this here. There were a lot of football games played. Let me see if I can find it real quick because that would be very exciting. Okay. There were in 2024 a grand total of, pulling up the spreadsheet, it's going to be great. In 6A through 2A, there were 6,120 football games. 6,120 football games. In 1A in private schools, there were 2,103 football games. Okay? So you add those together, and you have a grand total of about 8,200 football games.
Wow.
Played in Texas in 2024. And I looked at all of them. Every single one. I went and watched the tape of every single one. That's not true. But I do have the score line for every single one. So what I did was I separated them between one-score games decided by 8 points or fewer, and non-one-score games decided by more than 8 points. We're going to focus on those games decided by 8 points or fewer because when the game is close, one play could really turn the game. And so there were some teams that found themselves in a lot of one-score games. For example, and they will not be here on this list, but for example, in 2024, Maypearl played in 8 one-score games. Think about that. I believe they only played 11 games, which means that 8 of their 11 games were decided by 8 points or fewer. 8 of them. And by the way, they went 4-4 in those games. So now I want to take a look at which teams were the best in one-score games in 2024. Let's take a look at the first graphic here. And there's a couple of schools that obviously stood out above the rest. Post. We've talked about them, about how they had a terrific turnaround. At least a big part of that turnaround is that they were excellent in one-score games. They were 6-0. Same thing goes with one of the other surprises in Texas high school football in 2024, Fort Worth Benbrook. The Bobcats went 6-0 in one-score games. You had nobody went 5-0, but you had a bunch of teams there at the bottom that went 4-0 in one-score games. Teams like Deer Park, Shamrock, Llano went 4-0. You've also got teams like Longview Pine Tree, 6-1. First of all, they played 7 one-score games. That's crazy. Grandview, same way, 6-1. Midlothian went 5-1 in one-score games. Odessa Permian, Mojo, went 5-1 in one-score games. So these were the best teams in one-score games. If the game was tight, at least in 2024, They came out on top. But I want to look at the opposite now. I want to look at the teams that struggled in one-score games in 2024. We'll go to the next slide. And there were 15 teams that went 0-4. Okay? Including Anna, Clint, Frisco Heritage, Langham Creek, Mission Veterans Memorial went 0-4. Saginaw Boswell went 0-4. San Antonio Warren, Mesquite Horn. 15 total teams went 0-4. You can see at the bottom, Forney and Laredo LBJ went 1-5 in one-score games. And then teams like San Angelo Central, Sanger, and Vega went 1-4 in one-score games. These were teams that when the game was close, the ball didn't bounce their way. However you want to phrase it, they weren't good at closing out games, if you believe it's a skill issue, or the ball didn't bounce their way in the sense that they didn't come away with these wins in close games. And so now what I want to do is I want to extrapolate, because we talked about how there's a trend. Maybe there are teams that are particularly good in one-score games just as a program, or maybe it changes from year to year. So I wanted to expand it and go to look at the past 2 years, 2023 and 2024. And since in the last 2 years, there are a handful of teams that have been excellent in one-score games. At the top, the best team in one-score games in the last 2 years, the North Crowley Panthers. Ray Gates' ball club, the only team in UIL Texas high school football to be 7-0 in one-score games over the last 2 years. And then it's a Texas Football Today special at 6-0. The Coppell Cowboys, my alma mater, and the Llano Yellow Jackets, Ashley Pickles' alma mater, both of them 6-0 in one-score games. I want to skip one and then go down to the bottom. There's 4 teams that have gone 7-1 in one-score games. Okay, Crandall, Grandview, Hitchcock, and Post. They're 7-1 in one-score games over the last 2 seasons. But then you see that team in the middle, Port Neches Groves. So Port Neches Groves is 9-1 in one-score games in the last 2 seasons. Let me extrapolate that even further, VNA. Port Neches Groves, under head coach Jeff Joseph, is 14-1 in one-score games.
Wow.
He's been the coach since 2022. They are 14-1. They finally lost a one-score game this year. They lost to Nederland, their rival, in Mid-County Madness.
Close game.
In a close game, in a one-score game. That's the first one-score loss and only one-score loss under Jeff Joseph at P&G. Now, I asked him about that because you may remember Jeff Joseph was on the gatefold cover of Dave Campbell's Texas Football. I just brought it up and he goes, yeah, that kind of went crazy on Facebook. Like because I'm not trying to kiss my own butt here. I was the one who found that stat. And I put it out there and it kind of went viral on P&G football, like message boards and stuff. And it got back to him. And he had a really funny line when we were at the photo shoot. He said, yeah, all that means is that when I lose, I'm getting my butt kicked. Which I could see. I can see that's also a very Gary Joseph's kid thing to say, in my opinion. But yeah. Anyway, Port Neches Groves, I remain flabbergasted. 14-1 in one-score games over 2 seasons or 3 seasons is crazy. Let's now look kind of over the last 2 years at the teams that have been on the short end of the stick when it comes to close games. Okay, poor Carrizo Springs. Carrizo Springs can't buy one. They're 0-4 each of the last 2 years. They're 0-8 overall in the last 2 seasons. Then you've got 5 teams that are 0-7, 4 teams rather, in Borger, Cumbie, Lubbock, Monterey, and Spearman, all 0-7 in one-score games. Paul Pute and Round Rock McNeil not doing a whole lot better. They're 0-6 in one-score games. And then you see at the bottom, Hawkins, Leander Glenn, Liberty, shout out to Hudson Standish, Odom, and San Antonio Madison. They're 1-7 in one-score games over the last 2 seasons. They can't catch a break, right? That stinks. So there's one more thing I wanted to do, because now we've got the 2023 data and the 2024 data. And I wanted to look at which teams have been able to reverse their fortune. Whether they were really bad at one-score games and then got really good, or vice versa. So first, I want to look at teams that were bad in one-score games in 2023 and then suddenly really good in one-score games in 2024. and see if there's like a trend line. Let's take a look at this. The teams that had the positive, or rather, let's go to the other one if you wouldn't mind. We'll go to the positive one-score game reversion, okay? Odom. I can't believe Odom in 2023. They went 0-7 in one-score games. Like, you got to, like, at that point, you're born under a bad sign. You know what I mean? But they finally snapped it. They got one one-score win this past season. Look at Hondo and Katie Seven Legs. These teams were 0-3 in one-score games last year. They reversed the whip, went 3-0 in one-score games this year. Laredo Nixon went from 0-2 to 4-1. Longview Pine Tree. We talked about them in the beginning, how they were one of the best teams in one-score games in 2024. Was not the case the year before. They were 0-3. Frisco Wakeland went from 0-4 to 4-1. And then Itasca turned it around too, went from 1-4 to 2-0. But it wasn't all sunshine and daffodils. Let's go back to the other one, if you wouldn't mind. These are the teams that saw negative reversion, like reversion to the mean here. Anna, when they won the state championship in 2023, they were nails in one-score games, 4-0. 2024 came back and bit them. They got their receipt, 0-4. Clint went 2-0 in one-score games this past in 2023 to 0-4. Cushing, from 4-0 to 0-2. Fort Worth Wyatt. O.D. Wyatt went 2-0 to 0-4. Hallsville, Sabinal, they both went from 3-0 and turned that thing around to 0-3. What does all this mean? I think that if you take a look especially at those teams that are consistently good at one-score games, I think that there is a certain skill that comes along with it. That especially this is now me speculating. My guess would be that if you're pretty senior heavy, you're going to be pretty good at one-score games because you're going to be able to hold your nerve. So I look at those teams like Port Neches Groves. I look at those teams like North Crowley. I look at teams like Coppell, like Llano, teams that have been consistently good in one-score games. But I do think there is a fair amount of luck that comes into it, and a fair amount of one or two plays are going to turn in the game. Because you're looking at a team like Anna, right? Anna didn't go from state champion to cellar dweller, right? They went from state champion to still pretty good, but they went from 4-0 to 0-4 in one-score games. I think that a lot of it there is a good element of luck here, but there is some skill, I think, in one-score games. And I think a lot of it probably comes down to coaching and senior leadership. That's my guess on it. But anyway, there's a look at one-score games across the state of Texas here on Math Tuesday.
Math Tuesday.